The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Well, good afternoon. The biggest challenge facing America today is a federal government that simply won't live within its means. Spending cuts can get us halfway back to a balanced budget, but if we want to finish the job, we need to grow our economy so we can not only balance this budget, but begin paying down this dangerous $17 trillion national debt. Under the Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act of 1978, the Joint Economic Committee, which I chair, provides analysis and recommendations about the goals and policies set forth in the economic report of the President to assist the House of Representatives in its consideration of this budget resolution. During the next few moments, the members of the Joint Economic Committee will answer three questions. One, why has the Obama recovery been so weak and disappointing when compared with past recoveries? Two, how would a gradual reduction of federal spending relative to the size of our economy, as envisioned in the budget resolution, help hardworking Americans by accelerating economic growth, accelerating job creation, and increasing real wages? And finally, how would the reforms envisioned in the Republican budget help Congress to make better tax and spending decisions in the future? To call the current recovery a disappointment to the American people, well, it's an understatement. The current recovery ranks either dead last or near the bottom on virtually every economic measure when compared to other recoveries of the past half a century. The economy's poor performance has left the United States with an enormous growth gap. Real gross domestic product, our economy, our output, has grown at slightly more than half the average of other recoveries. Not surprisingly, given the recovery's anemic rate of economic growth, private sector payroll employment, that's jobs along Main Street, have also increased by only more than half the average of other recoveries. If you look at the paychecks after what people have in their budget at home after taxes, well, for middle-class Americans, for middle-class people, their wages have only increased by 1/3 of the average of other recoveries, and less than half of those of the next worst recovery. So middle class is struggling, but Wall Street, it's roaring. The S&P 500 total return index, adjusted for inflation, has more than doubled. This, Mr. Chairman, is the recovery that left Main Street and middle-class families behind. The Joint Economic Committee has compared this recovery to the average of other recoveries over the last 50 years, and I've identified this dangerous growth gap. And what's missing from the economy is, because of this disappointing recovery, is our economy should be $1.3 trillion larger today. Over $1 trillion larger today if this had just been an average economic recovery rather than dead last. And had the number of jobs along Main Street grown at the average rate of others, we would have 5.7 million more Americans working today than what they are under this disappointing recovery. Last month, we reached a milestone. The number of jobs along Main Street finally met its peak when the recession began. This milestone would be good news, except that it comes about 4 years late. So after all these years, now 6 years, we're just back to break even on the number of jobs along Main Street. And if you look at the economy, proportionally, there are fewer adults working today than when the recession ended. We've actually gone backwards as an economy since the recovery supposedly began. So no matter how you try to slice and dice the numbers, there's no hiding the fact that a smaller percentage of Americans are working today than when the recession ended. So turning from jobs to income that hard-working families receive, this recovery, regrettably, is even more disappointing. Since the recession ended, real personal income per person has barely edged up. I think it's 3.8%, barely noticeable. That's less than half what it should be in an average recovery. But what does it mean to an average family? And what it means is that the average person in America is missing over $3,000 a year from their paycheck. And an average family of four in America today is missing $1,086 a month from their family budget. Imagine that. Imagine for every family in America having an extra $1,000 a month to pay utilities, to save for college, which costs are exploding, to pay for the new health care costs under the Affordable Care Act, to invest maybe in that new washer dryer, that car. $1,000 a month is missing from the average family because of the slow growth policies of the White House and, regrettably, congressional Democrats. That's why middle-class families are being left behind, and that's why we can no longer stay the course in America. Families like this are missing too much money for Washington to continue to do the same old things that leave them behind. You know, I could fill this entire hour with different statistics to make the same point, but by every measure, the recovery is so disappointing. And the question is why? What's different about it? Well, some blame the housing bubble, its collapse, and the financial panic for the persistent weakness in our labor market. Recoveries following the collapse of a debt-financed asset price bubble like this are typically slower than other recoveries. We know that. While the collapse of the housing bubble undoubtedly has had some lingering effects, it's not the main factor, let alone the only factor for this disappointing recovery. What's unique about this recovery is the combination of the slow growth economic policies that President Obama has pursued. For example, looking back from 1982 to 2000, federal spending declined as a percentage of the economy, and the private sector boomed, creating more than 37 million jobs. Under President Obama, the opposite happened. Federal spending exploded to a post-World War II high of 24% of the economy, and we lost jobs. Presidents Kennedy and Reagan, they reduced the after-tax cost for new business investment, and the Joint Economic Committee has shown that there's a strong relation between when businesses invest in building equipment and software and the creation of real jobs along Main Street. In contrast, President Obama increased taxes on successful small businesses, on capital gains and dividends, and slowed this recovery. Looking back, Presidents Clinton and Reagan took a balanced approach toward environmental health and safety regulations. By contrast, the Obama administration has launched a regulatory tsunami, red tape at the highest levels of the last 3 years, historically high, and that slowed job creation along Main Street. Presidents Kennedy, Reagan, and Clinton opened new markets for American sales through international trade agreements. And aside from completing the agreements left unfinished by President Bush, and despite having a first-rate trade team in place, opening new markets, tearing down the America Need Not Apply sign, allowing our companies' workers to compete on a level playing field, that's now stalled under this White House. Presidents Kennedy, Reagan, and Clinton didn't burden a weak economy with costly new entitlement programs. By contrast, President Obama rammed the Affordable Care Act through Congress on party line votes. The controversial Affordable Care Act is heightening uncertainty, it's boosting taxes by more than $1 trillion, undermining key industries like medical devices and small businesses, and causing millions of Americans, including families in my communities, to lose access to doctors and health insurance plans that they liked. And now they're paying more for a plan they didn't ask for and are forced to do it or pay a tax. Notice that these past approaches to taxes and regulation, international trade, were taken by both Republicans and Democrat presidents, approaches that both parties have recognized as good for our economy. Yet President Obama's actions remain remarkably out of sync with those sound policies. He continues to stay the course while millions of Americans, they can't find full-time work. Millions more have just given up looking for work. Fewer and fewer people are in the workforce. It's not the elderly who are retiring. It's younger people, college graduates who spent all that time and all that money, and now they're working behind a cash register. Got middle-class Americans, again, missing over $1,000 from their monthly budget that could be helping them meet their needs because of the president's economic policies. What we do know, and what's incorporated in the Republican budget, is an economic policy mix that would do the opposite.